May the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I am not sure how I'm supposed to follow that. You could do like 8 to 12 more minutes and I think you'd get the same effect. Maybe better. Jesus told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The past, present, and future walk into a bar. It was tense. A man walks into a bar. He said, "Ouch." An oxymoron walks into a bar. The sound was deafening. Here's a seasonal one. 3 vampires walk into a bar. The first one says, "I'll have a pint of blood." The second one says, "I'll have one too." The third one says, "I'll have a pint of plasma." The bartender says, "So that'll be 2 bloods and a Blood Light?" Got a political one. The NSA walks into a bar. "Hey, I've got a great new joke for you," the barman says. The NSA smiles and says, "Heard it." The mushroom walks into a bar and orders a drink, but the bartender yells at him to get out before he stinks up the place. The mushroom looks taken aback and says, "Why? I'm a fun guy." Science. A neutron walks into a bar and orders a drink. When the neutron gets his drink, he says, "Bartender, how much do I owe you?" The bartender replies, "For you, neutron, no charge." 2 dragons walk into a bar. The first one says, "It sure is hot in here." His friend snaps back, "Shut your mouth." You had to think about that one for a second. The barman says, "We don't serve time travelers in here." A time traveler walks into a bar. Special one just for the dean. A malapropism walks into a bar, looking for all intents and purposes like a wolf in cheap clothing, muttering epitaphs and casting dispersions on his magnificent other who takes him for granite. Clearly, I missed my calling to be a stand-up comedian. Now I'm just stuck being a preacher. And you would be excused for wondering to yourself right now, what has any of this got to do with today's gospel message? And I would say to you that whenever we hear in the gospel something like, Jesus told this parable, and then says, 2 men went to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector, we are getting into the good stuff, the good humor of the Bible. Parables are just so wonderful. They're kind of stories, they're kind of riddles. And one of the remarkable things to me about parables has always been that they come to life. Kind of like characters in a movie who, when well done, you say, "Oh my gosh, that felt real to me." These people, though fictional, are real to us. Now, I'm going to do that thing that we always do when we're up here, when we explain a little bit of context, a little bit of background, because it's important for us to understand how Jesus sets up the joke so we can get to the deepest part of its truth. We all know Pharisees. They're the bad guys in the Bible. They're the ones wearing the black hats most of the time. But there are some notable exceptions. Think of Nicodemus. Think of Gamaliel. Think of Paul. Think of the Pharisees that Jesus has no problem going and having dinner with. The Pharisees who come to warn Jesus that things are about to go sideways. Pharisees, as a group, do present opposition to Jesus, but they're not all bad guys. If I'm one of Jesus' first listeners to this story, I'm expecting something good about a Pharisee. In fact, we might even note that Pharisees were people who took their faith seriously. The Pharisee says as much. He fasts twice a week. He tithes. He follows the law. This isn't a bad guy, per se. The problem, of course, with this Pharisee is that he's self-righteous. His seriousness has led to pomposity. His seriousness in his listing of all the things he's thankful for leaves out room for God. He's busy thanking himself for how great he is. And then, of course, he does that thing that my grandmother and your grandmother always warned you about, pointing a finger. Then you got 3 fingers pointing back at you. He looks over at the tax collector who stands off to the side silently weeping and bewailing and bemoaning his sins. And because of the way we have read this story and all the interpretive layers that we've put on it, we sort of think, oh, that poor tax collector. Downcast, outcast, marginalized, off and pushed away, judged. We kind of forget that tax collectors in Jesus' day were the bad guys. They're the ones wearing the black hat. They're violent thugs. They're kind of like mob enforcers a little bit. They've got all that they have, their wealth and their gain, from skimming off the top and the side and the bottom. This guy's a jerk. He's part of the oppressive machinery of the Roman Imperium, and he's working against his own people. And he knows it. And he knows it. So he stands there and he stutters out a prayer that it gets to the truth of the real problem for them and for us. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. In that simple, clear statement of truth, we get to the punchline, and it hits us in the gut. Because he is just honest enough to make a little bit of room for God to work. His heart cracks open, and God enters in with God's grace. Which seems appropriate since we're at Grace Cathedral this morning. That radical encounter with God's grace, God's love that we do not earn and we do not deserve, but are nevertheless given, gets in to the deep part of who we are, and it transforms us. It transforms the tax collector. We are told he goes home justified. Because it's a parable, we are free to imagine the life that he must have lived from there on out. And it can inspire our lives too. We might attempt to sort of modernize the parable for ourselves, and we could choose some other words and some other kinds of people to stick in the story. For Pharisee, we might try another archaic religious word, Episcopalian. You're good people. I know you're not self-righteous. But we have to keep watch on ourselves, don't we? For tax collector, we could try billionaire tax bro. We could stick in crooked politician from the other party. Anybody who we think is beyond reproach. The moral of the story, the punchline, the thing that is so true. Jesus says, "For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted." To be exalted, to be lifted into the presence of God, is to know your need for grace, and accept it, to let it transform you. When I was a newly minted priest, my clerical shirt was still actually black. My collar was stiff and crisp. I was sitting in my office at All Saints by the Sea Episcopal Church in Santa Barbara, California. Yes, it was a terrible place to have to serve. They really twisted my arm to go there. And one day, this guy in a beat-up truck pulled into our parking lot. He knocked on the door, and I came out in all my eagerness to help and be religious and what have you. He said, "Hey, my radiator's boiling over. Can I use that hose I see on the side of your church building? Can we fill up my radiator with some water?" And I said, "Of course, I'd be happy to help." So we stood there with the hose and the radiator, filling it up. Stood there like two guys going, "Yep, as one does, when the hood of a truck is open. I don't know what's going on in there, but I just know you got to say yep and He turns to me and he says, "Father, sometimes you don't know how much you need God until you're down to the last bit of your sanity. The last bit of how am I going to get through this day?" True words. Left me standing there as he went off down the road, probably to find the next hose to get him that next little step of the way. And I thought to myself, well, that was true. God's grace, given to us, to shape us, to form us, help us make room for the things that God is calling us to do in this time, in this season, in this faith. It's all grace. It's kind of funny how it finds us in the least likely of places. It's funny because it's true. Amen.